Good morning, everybody. Just waiting for the last few people to leave the waiting room. The waiting room, sorry. Okay, it looks like everybody is connected. Hope you can all hear me. So welcome to this Innovation Lab. This is the October version of our webinar series. And today we've got Jonathan from Carbon Co-op, which I'm really excited to hear about their People Powered Retrofit program, and also just theories of social replication in general. So yeah, welcome to this one. This is a series funded by Power to Change for those of you who haven't been before. And we showcase innovation projects from the community energy sector. A lot of them are from our Next Generation project, and then we also invite speakers from the wider community energy sector. So Jonathan is a bit of a mix of those two today. So he's actually one of the groups that's funded by Next Generation, but today going to be speaking about a slightly different project. So before I hand over to Jonathan, I'm just going to do a really quick Zoom controls thing, and then I will just pass over and we'll hear about their project. So next slide, please. Great. So I'm sure everyone knows by now, microphone and camera are at the bottom. Please leave these switched off. It is going to be recorded and posted on our website afterwards. So yeah, please just keep them switched off for ease and for everyone's internet and audio working nice and smoothly. There is a Q&A session at the end, and if Megan wants some more detail from your questions, she'll sort of come and unmute you, so don't worry about doing that yourselves. There's a chat box at the bottom, and this is the place where we'd really like you to put the questions. Feel free to ask them throughout whilst Jonathan's speaking. I can see there's somebody else from Carbon Co-op online, I think Matt, who will answer your questions. If they're just really sort of quick, snappy questions, he can type an answer in there. If there's something worth a bit more discussion and detail, then Megan will make a note and bring them to the Q&A session later on. You can also bring up the participant list, and if your name is maybe your company or something like that, it'd be great if you could change it to your name and your company, and that helps us see who's asking what questions in the chat box. Anything else? You can raise your hand if you want to. Yeah. I think that's everything. So next slide, please. So yeah, back to today's webinar. We've got Jonathan at Carbon Co-op talking about the People Powered Retrofit program and the social models of social replication. So that'll be about a half an hour presentation, followed by a half an hour interview with me, and then there'll be 30 minutes for questions at the end. So please just pop any questions in the chat box as we go, and Megan will be collating them for that final session. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Jonathan.
Yeah, hi there. Really pleased to be here today. Thank you for asking me to do this. So as Rachel says, we're a bit of a hybrid in the sense of, so we're part of the Next Generation funding stream, and our project in that is the Energy Data Co-op, which is synthesizing different energy services all around data and aggregation for cooperative community energy groups. All sorts of things from smart meter integration tools to home assessments and yeah, all kinds of things really. I'm going to be speaking today not about that, but about People Powered Retrofit. People Powered Retrofit is solely focused on, as the name suggests, retrofit, and from a community focus. And I'm going to talk a bit about what makes our approach to retrofit particular, some of the lessons and learnings we've taken from that. But what unites these two things, the Energy Data Co-op and People Powered Retrofit, is the idea of replication. And Next Generation, as well as a whole host of other funded projects out there in the community energy sector, part of the stated aim of those projects is to create new learning that can then be replicated and shared elsewhere. And I think the community energy sector is a fantastic example of a sector of like-minded organisations, locally focused in their own individual areas, that share similar values, but also potentially similar approaches. So it creates a fantastic test bed for replicating things that work well in one area in another. And our next generation energy data co-op is around that, like what tools and mechanisms can we develop that can then be replicated elsewhere. And People Powered Retrofit is the same. And part of that has been we're reacting to demand, really. We're doing something that's working here in Manchester and people really want to do it elsewhere. And so both these things like test ideas of replication. And my contention today is that replication isn't necessarily something that happens passively, that it is an active process and one that needs structure and framing to take place effectively. Can take place just completely by osmosis and passively, but it's not as effective as if we create frameworks for that to take place. So my first part today, just talking about People Powered Retrofit and the learning from that, and then the second part is going to be ideas of replication. So a little bit of a two-parter. So starting with People Powered Retrofit, and our focus really for this is how do we build local markets for retrofit that operate at scale? And the two elements of this sentence are local markets, i.e. locally based, locally orientated services that deliver retrofit for clients. And in this context is owner-occupier clients. Not to say we do a lot of work in fuel poverty, in the not able to pay, in eco, but this specific service is around able to pay. And the second thing is scale. So we've seen lots of different projects where we have eco homes or super homes, an individual building here and there, and that's fantastic. But there are 24, 25, 26 million, there's lots of arguments, how many homes there are in the UK that need retrofit, and how are we going to be able to tackle that at scale? A little bit quick intro to Carbon Co-op. So Carbon Co-op, we're a cooperative, as the name suggests, not for profit, based in Greater Manchester. We operate a little bit further afield in the northwest. Our focus is around enabling our householder members to make large scale reductions in their energy use, both in their homes and in their wider community. So the focus of our work today has been really around retrofit, although, as I say, we are involved in energy systems work and also energy democracy work as well. But our householders, there are 260 of these now, all paying a little bit of a fee, £35 a year, to get access to the cooperative. We help them to retrofit their homes, both directly through doing work and services, and indirectly by increasing awareness and capacity. But they also become part of a group of like-minded individuals all working towards similar aims. And all kinds of people. Do check out our website, we've got videos and stuff. Our approach to retrofit is, for people that aren't aware of this, retrospectively fitting energy efficiency improvements, domestic small-scale renewables, and smart systems to homes. For a variety of reasons that we'll talk about in a second. But that's the idea of retrofit. Some terms to help you navigate: fabric first, the idea that you improve the fabric performance of a building first before you move on to the services. So you don't put a heat pump in a very drafty home, you improve the insulation first, you improve the fabric of the home. There are all sorts of reasons about that. One of the key ones is you don't want to put new tech into a house that's falling down. But secondly, you want to reduce demand as much as possible before you move on to like satisfying that energy demand. It's whole house, so it's taking a whole house approach. That doesn't necessarily mean doing the whole house in one go, but it means having a plan. So you might be doing it in stages, but you're doing it all together with a holistic plan. So you're not doing stuff now that you're ripping out again in 5 years' time. We use low impact materials. We look at the whole life cycle. We look for low embedded carbon, avoid things like oil-based materials where possible, and plastics. And we also put our tools that we create into the open source license. That's how we publish them. And we advocate strongly open data standards. So that's the idea that if we're doing stuff, we can integrate with other people that are working in this area. We're also very much committed to past 2035, a quality standard around process. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but there's links if you want to follow that up. So that's a bit of our background, and we've been doing stuff for years. We've been going for 10 years, but actually been working as a project for more than that, and working on retrofit and helping people to retrofit their homes. A lot of the early work was a little bit stop and start. You get people to a certain point and they wouldn't be able to commission work. People Powered Retrofit is our project. It's been funded by Bayes. They funded the setup of the project, but the delivery of the project is actually funded by the householders themselves. So this isn't a free thing that we're just handing out to people. Clients are paying for this service. It's an end-to-end service to deliver retrofit to householders, able to pay householders in the Greater Manchester area. And we're one of 6 pilots taking place around the UK, but we're the most northerly by 200 miles. So what are the barriers to retrofit that people face at the moment? And let's typify previous approaches that have the Green Deal being the last and most famous of these in the 2013, 2014. It sought to work with big organisations, a top-down approach, a one-size-fits-all approach to retrofit. But as we saw, it worked with people like Carillion, who are no longer in operation. It worked with organisations that weren't familiar with working in people's homes on an individual basis. It produced work, as you can see on the bottom left-hand side, that was of poor quality and might we say, scandalous. And so retrofit isn't happening because householders, they're faced with all these barriers. They don't know where to start. They don't know what to do on their house first. They are worried about making decisions that are going to impact their home for many years to come, and they're worried about making the wrong decision. They need access to technical expertise to understand all these kinds of things. They lack access to the right kind of contractors that they trust to come into their homes and that they're happy to work with. So they face multiple barriers. One of the key things I would say above and beyond this is it's not normal. It's not a normal thing to go out and procure a retrofit for your home. How many people know friends and neighbours who've done this? Maybe they know 1 or 2 people, but they don't know 10 or 20. It's not a normal thing to do. So let's just speculate for a minute. Why do you think people commission retrofit works? Post your ideas in the chat. So yeah, why is it that a client comes to us and says, I would like a retrofit? What's motivating them? What's in the background? If you've got ideas, put them in the chat. I'll be interested to see what people think. In a second, I will show you why the people we work with do that. Okay, so this is a list of householder motivations. This is one particular survey that we did, the most recent, but it's pretty standard and consistent over time, the reasons. Number one reason for the householders we work with is around reducing carbon emissions. People want to make a difference in the environment, and that's why they're retrofitting their homes. They want to be warmer as well, they want to be more comfortable. They're worried about climate perturbations taking place, and they want their home to be more resilient to those, to flood and storms and high winds and that sort of thing. And they also want to reduce their energy bills as well. But that's the important thing there. I think if you ask a policymaker why people retrofit their homes, they instantly start talking about cost benefit analysis and money and payback periods. When you talk to actual householders that want to retrofit their homes, the answers are different. Money is certainly part of the mix, but it's not the thing. It's not the overriding thing. There's a range of things, a range of motivators, and it's important to understand those. It's important to understand the people we're working with. The people that work, that are members of community energy groups that we're working with, they are the innovators and the early adopters. This is a typical innovation curve. So as I said, retrofit is not normal. It's a new service, it's a new kind of offer to people. And most new innovative technologies follow this innovation curve. To begin with, you have the innovators and the early adopters. Think about mobile phones in the 80s and 90s, those bricks that businessmen in like Wall Street would be using, and they are the innovators. The early adopters are perhaps people in the mid-90s who were starting to pay a little bit extra for this new technology that was emerging. And it was only in the late 90s and early noughties that the early majority came on, when we had things like contracts and phones that came bundled with contracts and text messaging. And that's, I think, this is the mistake of Green Deal, that they saw a one size fits all. Here's a service that works for everyone. But actually, that's not the way these new technologies and new services work. You need to work with the innovators and early adopters first to test out approaches before you tackle the early majority, because the service and how it looks is going to be very different to the early adopters. And also the learning and the mistakes and the tolerance for those is a lot higher in the early adopters. So we can afford to build our services with those early adopters rather than designing something that is for a middle majority, you know, that's years off. And these are the pioneers. These are our members within community energy. A lot of our members are willing to go above and beyond to test out a heat pump before anyone in their street has got one, to say, yes, I want a smart meter because I want to understand my energy use, and I've been collecting my data on an Excel file for the last 20 years. So we have a window into the future, really, with our members, and these are the ideal people to work with, and their friends and neighbours, to test out these new approaches. So in terms of People Powered Retrofit, our first place to start was understanding those people, to defining some personas and to map where they are, understanding clients and targeting resources to them. I'm just going to skip over this, but basically we embarked on a large-scale mapping enterprise, understanding, using open data sets available from BASE, from the local authority here in Greater Manchester, as well as knowledge and data we collected ourselves from the people most likely to retrofit their homes. And these maps show where the people in Greater Manchester are who are most likely to procure retrofit. And without going into too much detail, these people are more likely to be slightly older and slightly richer than their friends and neighbours, because they're likely to have stayed in defined communities with shops and high streets and services, rather than to move to posher areas, for want of a better word, and to leverage their lending. So they're staying where they are because they're part of communities and they're interested in investing in their home for a whole heap of reasons. And because they're in more connected communities, we're able to find them more easily. Bit of a window into the market research, and this is the thing I talk about early adopters, that the average kind of cost of works budgets for these clients that we're working with is around the £20,000 to £50,000 mark. In fact, the average on our current client list is £45,000. That's the median. And we do have several over £200,000. So these are people with substantial amounts of money to invest. They're facing barriers to using that money, to spending that money, and we can unlock those for them. And there's a verified kind of income stream there for us. A little bit on the personas. Again, I won't go into this too much detail, but we have climate pragmatists and climate idealists. The idealists are willing to go to the nth degree and to fit hurricane-proof doors, whereas the pragmatists have a certain amount of money they want to invest. They want to do their bit for the environment, but they're not necessarily going to fit hurricane-proof doors. And we also have civic-minded retirees. These are older people, not necessarily about climate change, but about doing their bit. They're doing their bit for the civic good, so to speak. And often these people are not going to be there to benefit, you know, for the whole 25-year period of these measures. So they're doing it for the right reasons. Once you understand, and once we understand where things are in Greater Manchester, that's when we targeted community-based social marketing. So these are like marketing campaigns in order to recruit people into the service, and they sit on top of our already existing kind of engagement with members to recruit people into the organisation. And it's all about creating trust and effectively engaging and recruiting clients. Again, I'll typify it with an old approach to marketing, one which is quite top-down, adverts on the back of buses, models that nobody knows who these people are, and that was the approach of Green Deal, and it failed. It didn't engender trust in people, and therefore it failed. Community-based social marketing is an approach which is often used in healthcare as a way of creating new norms within communities. And it's around innovative behaviours. It's very bottom up. It's working with people. It's working with institutions. This is very analogous to the public health approach we should be taking around COVID. It's fundamentally about values and working with people's values and talking to people's values. Again, this is stuff that community energy is really good at doing. As an example of a marketing campaign we ran in Levenshulme, events, activities, free, paid, mixing it up a bit. Some of it was just awareness raising, some of it was targeted training. We ran a big event as well, home energy parties in people's homes. So it's a variety of different activities, all aimed at kind of echoing together, engendering people to get involved. The research from the United States, where this has been used for retrofit, shows it's a lot more effective and a lot more cheaper than standard marketing campaigns using big billboards and all this sort of thing. It doesn't really work. This works, it's proven to work. So that's the way of bringing in people to the service. We also need to look at supply chain as well. It's been a constant area highlighted that there's a lack of capacity. I'm not going to talk in depth about this, but the householder, when procuring retrofit, there's a whole heap of different competencies out there and a whole heap of different kind of actors. I think maybe government think about it as like householder, contractor, work done. Actually, there's all different people. So our service needs to cope with these people. We have been working with the RMI sector rather than these big tier 1 construction firms that are really just not suited to going into people's homes. RMI is refurbishment, maintenance and improvement. So these are people already working in homes and communities, doing extensions, loft conversions, new kitchens. These are people already expert, already skilled. They need more skill around retrofit and some specific competencies. And that's why we do training. We do on-site training. We keep it really practical. It's not based in classrooms. Things like PAS 2035, PAS 2030, a lot of it's classroom based. A lot of it is not that relevant to actual homes. And you know, not to say downing, poo-pooing it completely, but we need really working with skilled contractors about on-site, it's about skills, it's about practices, about peer learning. And there's a real role here, community energy, for facilitating that within local areas to build supply chain. We're a fantastic intermediary for these companies. And it's not about going to London where the big tier 1 companies are based. So that's householders and contractors. Moving on to service design. So what does our service actually look like? We went about it, I won't typify the Green Deal one's like based on cost benefit and mechanistic thing. You do this, and often we'll hear from people that say, "Oh, their client isn't really involved." We look at their house needs this doing. They've got no decision making involved at all. Well, that's nonsense, really. For us, the client is at the focus of the service design. They need to be involved in the process, and we involve them in the design of our process here. You can see all sorts of different activities. We also involved contractors as well, architects, all kinds of people involved in this process, so that the service we're producing works for everyone, clients, contractors, for us. This is it in broad terms. There are 5 stages to it. Advice at the top, and we have retrofit advisor who we employ. Making a plan, and we have an assessment regime there. We've rebranded it as home retrofit planner assessment. When people have an understanding of what the works they need to have done in their house, and they make a decision on which ones they're going to go for, it's then on to design development. And we work with retrofit coordinators. We have one on the staff, and we work with other freelancers as well. There's then procurement support. So we're helping people procure their works, engaging with contractor networks. We're not contracting on their behalf. We're not involved with that, but we're helping. We sit to the side and help them procure contractors. Then there's on-site support, and that's around quality assurance and understanding key areas. That's where we work with PAS 2035. And we're also able to offer contractor training on-site for those specific kind of skills. And then it moves on to handover. So it's an end-to-end service from advice through to handover. We stage payments at every stage. So people, except for the advice stage, which is free, but then it's kind of, so we do like a half-hour advice session, then it's on to an assessment. And from there on, it's a decision. Do you want to pay the extra bit? Do you want to go further? And people pay a little step they pay step by step, and they go further. And at the moment, it's working really well. Some of the competencies and roles involved. We've got retrofit advisor and service manager in blue, who are the core of it. And we have coordinators and assessors in yellow. And I say at the moment, we're extremely busy. We've got 50 active clients and about 100 people on the waiting list and the real blockage for us is the coordinators and the assessors, getting more of them through the door. And as I said before, we have some on the team, but for scaling purposes, we need to bring in freelancers. So yeah, we're in the market if anyone knows any people, but we've got a few as well. At the top, we've got like a technical lead, Marianne Heaslip, my colleague who's at Urbed, who's an architect, a specialist in this area. I'm managing the program. We also have a lot of ICT development, so information technology that goes behind this. We've got a CRM system, customer relationship management, job tracking, the assessment tool as well. We have training as well with the contractors, and we're working with architects, engineers, and contractors. So a really big message for kind of councils and policymakers is like, there's loads of skills here, there's loads of jobs here, there's loads of training as well, training new people. So it's a real, it's a good news story. It's all very locally based. So what are the lessons, just to round up this part of the thing? So first 6 months, yeah, we've got 50 plus clients. We're actually going to pause for a little bit to get clients all the way through the process and do that training and building up that capacity. Clients are really happy so far to pay the fees. It's all very open. It's all very clear. People can see what they're paying for. We've got a daily rate. We issue fee proposals at every stage. Got really high levels of trust and satisfaction as measured as we go through. Home visits, we paused them for a couple of months with COVID, but they restarted from July, basically. And there's been no discernible drop-off in demand. If anything, it's been going through the roof. The more people are aware that we're doing stuff. It's iterative and ongoing, the development, so we're improving it at every stage. And the Green Homes grant impact is debatable, I would say. I think one thing to say is that if your average works cost is 50 grand, then 5 grand is 10% of that. So it's not a huge motivator. At the same time, there's a huge lack of contractors to deliver the Green Homes grant. Actually, a few community energy groups have said, like, how can we get involved? How can we help out? I actually don't think necessarily this is a great area for community energy to get involved. We have different types of clients who come to us. They either have the money and they're interested in doing big projects and the grant's relatively not that important, or they only want to get the grant and they don't want anything else. And for us, we can't really help them. There's some basic information out there, but they're not going to be resourcing our time. In the middle, there are people that want the grant and they want to do stuff, and the grant's a bit of a doorway into more stuff, and that we can help those people. But it is debatable. And unless the government changes the delivery mechanism to resource intermediaries to offer that advice, and we see councils in the same position, unless that resource is liberated, then it's kind of a bit debatable how much we can help, really. And so some lessons for building a retrofit market from People Powered Retrofit. One size does not fit all. Build trust from the start. Remain client focused at all time. Do that mapping and research, understand the market, understand the people you're working with, test and pilot, start small, but start. Be iterative and flexible. Start going along, testing, developing, build in technical expertise. This is a big barrier for community energy groups. You need to be able to work with, people like architects, surveyors, coordinators. You need to have that resource either in the staff team or working closely with it. Get training as soon as possible and be open and collaborative. So that's the lot on People Powered Retrofit. Give people something to think about. Replication. Okay, so we've got a huge amount of interest in people wanting to replicate People Powered Retrofit, either in part or in whole elsewhere. So what does replication mean, and how can we approach it in a structured way? And what are the questions around like autonomy and the autonomy of local groups when delivering some of these services that might be replicated nationally? In doing this a little bit, I would say that I've had a huge amount of help and expertise from the School of Social Entrepreneurs, who ran a fantastic 6-day course, Social Replication and Scaling. I can't advocate their work highly enough, based around expert witnesses, really participatory learning. And as a key bit of toolkit here, the Social Replication Toolkit from the ICSF, there's loads of information and resources for anyone interested in this. What I would say is I'm really interested in replication within community energy and building a practice, a community of practice there, if others are interested too. So what is replication? Well, we can think about things like ideas like religion and political ideologies. There's a conservative association in every small town in the country, or most of them. There's a church, at least one, usually in most towns and many villages. Or banks and shops. So what is Barclays but a bank that works well in one area and then has been replicated elsewhere? Or a supermarket like the Co-op or Tesco? Food banks, sad to say, are a fantastic demonstration of replication, and they gave expert witness, one of the Trussell Trust, on the training that I did. So a model that works really well somewhere and then has been replicated in lots of different places. Community energy groups, when we think about things like the feed-in tariff and how that worked in terms of solar PV, wind, hydro projects, fantastic example of replication, ideas replicating. And credit unions and even things like McDonald's. McDonald's, it's a franchise basically. Anyone can open a McDonald's. Anyone can apply to open a McDonald's anywhere. It's the same idea replicated. What's social replication? Well, social replication is not that much different from replication, but it's replication with a social or environmental issue at heart. If we're tackling a social problem or an environmental problem such as climate change, if we can replicate that model, then that's an example of social replication. And it's the idea of replicating those in another city, another town, another region. If something only works and is so particular to a certain area that it won't work elsewhere, then it's not an example of replication. Why replicate? I learned a lot from this course. Reduced risk. Okay, 1 in 10 new companies set up in the UK succeeds. 9 in 10 fail. But for franchise, that's inverted. So 9 out of 10 new franchises succeed and are trading in more than a year later, because it's a well understood solution that will work everywhere. And it means that banks and organizations are willing to fund new franchises rather than kind of new business ideas. Obviously, for things like climate change, we can have a bigger impact if more people are doing this. We can also gain organizational learning. Like community energy sector learn a hell of a lot from hundreds of different groups doing the same thing. We've developed practices and techniques that we've shared together. We're stronger together as well if we're all doing similar things, and we've got greater resilience to perturbations and things. You can see that in the food bank movement. That, they work together, they build strength. And there's reduced costs through things like bulk buying, bulk purchasing, and greater brand awareness as well. We've seen that with community energy. People are aware of the brand, so to speak. Now, replication, it has this whole range, this spectrum of replication. And I know I'm going a little bit over time, so I won't go more than 5 minutes, Rachel and Megan. But yeah, this is a key area really. So yeah, there is spectrum. On the one end, there's dissemination of ideas. On the other end, there's wholly owned replication. In the middle is affiliation. So dissemination, okay, we come up with a really good idea that we think works everywhere, so we disseminate it. So we put a report out into the public domain, we run a webinar, we do a blog, we offer training, for example. So we're disseminating, we're throwing out the knowledge. On the other end, maybe like your Barclays, something works somewhere, so we branch. So we create a new branch, a Manchester branch, a Sheffield branch. So that's wholly owned. So on the one end, dissemination is really flexible. On the other end, it's really constrained. And in the middle, there's affiliation. And this spans a lot of interesting models like accreditation, federations, associations, social licensing and social franchising, which I'm going to talk a bit more about. But these are ways in which organizations can work together for shared aims using similar models. And here is like pros and cons to all those things. I won't go through these. You can see the presentation at your leisure, but essentially dissemination is really quick and cheap to do, but it's pretty low control, and who knows where their ideas goes and whether they'll be used. Will people replicate what you're doing just because you're putting it out there? Wholly owned is the inverse of that. So there's a lot less risk to creating a new branch, but it's quite slow. There's an investment of resources, but you can be very controlled in how you do that. Affiliation mixes those things. You can be relatively quick in doing that. You can expand networks of like-minded practice, and you can create structures in which those are done with some control, but some flexibility to local kind of conditions as well. And that's why maybe affiliation offers some opportunities for us. So how do you replicate? Well, you go through these processes. You prove, you design, you systematize, you pilot, and you scale. Proving, I think, is a big one. We might do something here in Manchester. How can we prove that it'll work in Sheffield? Why is it not just that it works on some particularity here? And the other big thing for us is, are we replicating models that actually generate income and are viable? If we have a loss-making model here, maybe it's subsidised either by voluntary work and effort, or perhaps by grant funding. If we replicate that elsewhere, then we replicate that need for voluntary time and for grant funding. And if we're all going the same grant funding, then we're obviously doing ourselves down. If you're not generating income, if you're not creating a model that generates income and profit and is viable, then it can't be replicated, basically, because you're just replicating the pain. So you prove, you design, you systematize, which is basically write down all the things that make your model and your thing. You pilot it in some locations, and then you scale it up. Okay, some things to note. One thing that's key to replication is that the people implementing share similar values and approach. I often thought about replication as like putting ideas out into the wide world, and like you've got to sell them. You're like, oh, use our idea, use our idea. Actually, that's the road to pain. You want to work with people that share your values, that you enjoy working with, really, because replication actually involves a lot of interaction and learning and working. Don't just throw it out there and look for profit. You need a business plan that works for the implementer and the replicator, both the person or the organization disseminating the information and the others replicating it. And dissemination is a pretty poor way of replication. It's pretty high risk that people aren't going to pick up or understand properly the model. So successful replication requires upfront and ongoing commitment. Also, I think this is a particular one, I'm just last couple of slides now, but in the community energy, are people ready to replicate? So have you developed and demonstrated a sustainable business model? Are the functions necessary well defined so you can replicate, so people know what they need to do? Is there a significant social need in a market for where you're replicating? Is it possible to work in a different context? Is the brand, whatever you're replicating, is it understood and valued by people as well? Is not even know about it? And is there a supply of people and organisations willing and able? Do they have the capacity to replicate? So, elements of a good franchise: geographic exclusivity. You're working in a certain area. There's a brand. There's a manual. Quality assurance, so people know that it works well. The replicators. There's a business model. There's often an upfront fee, so people pay for the replication, maybe training and the manual and the knowledge, and there's an ongoing fee in terms of like ongoing business that's generated. So last thing, Home Energy Planner is our assessment tool, and this is one of the things we've been replicating. The first stage was dissemination. We put it out there, we made it open source, and we hope people would pick it up. Actually, it's quite a complex service, quite technically, a lot of technical requirements. So dissemination wasn't very successful. We then moved on to the stage we're kind of finishing at the moment, which is social franchising piloting. So badging up the technology so it could be replicated, systematizing the training so we could do it repeatedly, creating a brand that's well known, quality assurance so we can oversee how it's replicated, and like-minded organizations. We're working with Cumbria Action for Sustainability. And now we're moving on to the social franchising element, which is around, a business plan, a manual, legal agreements, and probably capitalizing a new organization to replicate this. So a little bit rushed at the end, sorry about that. But yeah, those are some of the themes around replication. Those are some of the ideas, and I'm sure we can pick up some of the questions now. With Rachel.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was really, really interesting. I can see that there's lots of questions coming in on the chat. Please keep those coming in. Megan is pulling those all together and we'll come to those in sort of 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes. So first of all, there's a couple of questions from me. So first one, first of all, focusing on the sort of People Powered Retrofit project, who are your key partners?
Yeah, I think that's something really to emphasize, is that these kind of quite integrated, technically complex projects, we've got a whole load of partners. The most important partners in this project are Urbed. Urbed is a cooperative of urban designers and architects, and we've worked with them ever since we started, and they offer some of that technical expertise. And the world of architecture and retrofit is full of things like planning permission, health and safety, architectural details, all this sort of thing, where the average community energy group, and certainly me when I started in this area, didn't have a clue what it was all about, contracts, all this sort of thing. And being able to work with that technical expertise is just really essential. Moving out from there, we get a lot of support from local authorities here. We're in the city region of Greater Manchester, so we've got Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Andy Burnham's our mayor here, and they provide a lot of kind of the political support, and they open a lot of doors as well. And then we work with a whole host of other people, training providers, the ACB, Association of Environmentally Conscious Building, they're fantastic. A lot of providers here around community energy that we bring on to do bits of consultancy work and all sorts of things. Yeah, so it's really about having an integrated team, designers as well, and all sorts of things. So yeah, the more people, the better, really.
Yeah, and I think it showed that diagram that you showed earlier with the lots of purple and orange arrows, showed exactly how many different types of people are really involved in these kind of projects. Hopefully people could maybe go back and have a look at that slide.
Yeah, it's funny, that slide, the aim of it isn't to show every single one, but to just show that there's this network of people that are involved in a retrofit, and to understand the complexity. But yeah, you can have a look at it. It should be legible.
Okay, great. So the next thing was, what social and environmental impact are you aiming to have with this project?
Yeah, I mean, evaluating impact is really important here, and there's lots. We went through a really interesting process here about trying to understand, because the clients, the householders, they've got a certain impact they want to achieve, and I outlined that about carbon emissions, comfort, and bills. From our point of view, running the service, we want to evaluate another set of impacts, which is around like satisfaction, the speed at which people are moving through, the amount of money we're generating. And there are also funders like Bayes who are funding the process, and they want to see things as well, and they want to see relevance to kind of building energy performance and all that sort of thing. So it's the thing about retrofit is, so the social and environmental impacts are essentially carbon savings as a result of the measures installed, but also financial savings, and also wider comfort in terms of internal temperature and air tightness. So we've got those things as well. And then you've got all these other things that stretch to kind of training and jobs creation and the wider impact on the community and the health as well. And I think health is a massive one with things like COVID and ventilation and stuff like that. So that's not necessarily a very simple answer, but you've got all these different things. And then I've got my colleague Matt, who's on the call at the moment, and one of the things he's looking at, as well as another colleague Helen, is how you evaluate all those things, how you kind of baseline people when they come in and understand where they're at, and then track them as they go through the process using these tools, and then understand things at the end. Like he's working with new environmental monitoring data and sensors in the home that track things like temperature and humidity and that sort of thing. So there's loads of potential impact here, but a huge challenge is trying to evaluate and understand it and present that data to all these different people. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so now I want to ask you a bit more about the sort of social replication side of things. So you did touch on this a little bit at the end, but if you had a business model, what do you think are the next steps for successfully replicating that? What would you do next?
Yeah, just go through this good point to come back. So if you have a business model and you think, this could work elsewhere, I think there are a few things. One is viability, like does it work in your area? Like, is it working? Is it viable? Or are there some hidden subsidies in there? Maybe like you're working 60-hour weeks, that doesn't make it replicable. Maybe you're using grant funding, that doesn't make it replicable. Another thing is to validate the social impact as well. So yeah, is it work as a business? Is it have that social and environmental impact as well? And then it's also about basically understanding, will it work in other areas? Basically, will it work in other geographic areas, or is there something very particular to the area where you live? There are a whole heap of things here in this diagram, but the really important one, I would say, is piloting. What I would not advocate is people saying, I've got a business that works here, so I'm going to go out and sell it now. It's out there. And the thing we did with the Home Retrofit Planner was to work with Cumbria Action for Sustainability, CAFS, to very slowly pilot them using the same assessment tool for homes. And they used a lottery funded project. So it was zero risk for them. And that means there's zero risk for us as well. That like reduces our kind of, worries about replicating something that doesn't work. And we're able to learn these replication kind of success things with them. And then over time, they built it up and now they're offering it on the same kind of fee earning basis as we are. So proving and demonstrating and piloting, there are other things in there about systematizing it and writing a manual and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I think those are some of the things to emphasize.
Yeah. Yeah. So what sort of tools do you think are needed to make this replication happen? Is it like an online platform? Is it a mentoring scheme? Like, what do you think's the way forward with those kind of things?
Yeah, there's different elements depending on what the service is. But what I would say is that online tools and platforms have made the ability to replicate services like a whole heap of a lot easier, basically. With the assessment tool, when we started, we had it as a spreadsheet that was like a horrifically complicated spreadsheet that sat on one person's computer and sat in this office here in Manchester. And that really limited our ability to replicate it because it meant that you had to be able to work in Manchester. And it was limited to people that could use that computer, a certain Mac-based package as well. So again, really limited. Now, what we've done in the subsequent years is work with people like Open Energy Monitor, based in Bangor, to create an online system, based on an online platform. And that just makes it just so much easier because then anyone can use that same platform anywhere in the UK. It used to be that we had to go and install something on a server. Now it can just be replicated. So platforms is a real key thing. Another kind of tool or approach is training. So it's the ability to train other people in the work that you are doing. And it might seem like with the energy assessments, we're training assessors, and that seems relatively clear, or training for that. But actually, there's a job of training people to run the service, which is not the actual assessments, but running the service, which is like the community, the social marketing element and recruiting people, like administrating sales, evaluating impact, all that sort of thing. So there's a job of work around training that's there as well. So yeah, training and platforms are two of the key things really. And I think the other thing to emphasize is networks really. And these kind of new models and tools work best when disseminated via existing networks. So people that already work together, already have shared values. And things like Community Energy England are fantastic for that. Next Generation, creating these whole new networks. So yeah, so it's kind of platforms, networks and training.
Yeah. And do you think those online platforms like Lumio and stuff that we have going on, are they enough just if they're available, or do you think there needs to be more sort of active and facilitated networking?
Um, there's the two parts to that question. One are things like Lumio, and we use Trello, which is a fantastic tool basically to manage stuff. And so there's a lot of good online tools to facilitate networking. More active networking, it's hard. I think reflecting on the networks we've built over the years, they're usually built on shared conversations, shared ideas, shared outlooks and approaches, shared political kind of outlooks as well, and shared problems. So I think I always think there's a mixture of quite structured kind of approaches to networking and very unstructured. So in Greater Manchester, we used to run something called Fueling Manchester, and it was just everyone involved in community energy just meet at a pub for 2 or 3 hours, no agenda or anything, and serendipitous conversations, all that sort of thing. Sometimes people would like rebel and like, no, we need an agenda, but it's actually no, let's just chat, and you learn stuff about hydro schemes that didn't work, or solar panels that broke, that you don't hear in an open meeting, and you get that information and knowledge. That's the sort of thing you need, really.
So it's sort of the lunchtime chats when you're at a conference that are
I mean,
valuable.
that's why like COVID makes those sorts of things really, really hard. It has both kind of liberated these kind of webinar based, we can talk to people in different countries and all over the UK, and that's brilliant. But it has reduced the opportunities for those serendipitous, water cooler conversations. But maybe there's ways we can find those,
Yeah, definitely something to keep working on, isn't it? I think when we put a webinar out there, we want to say what it's going to be about and what we're going to talk about and what the agenda is, and it is very difficult to create those more casual conversations, especially because everyone has to speak one at a time, and otherwise it sounds just a mess. So yeah, difficult.
Breakout rooms are interesting. Like within Zoom, you just like assign these breakout rooms, 2 or 3 people. I've met someone from Kenya, someone from Germany, learned all about retrofit in Germany, met all these weird people. But it is odd as well.
yeah. And I guess part of like your retrofit program, I know you do sort of green open homes events like we do down here in Bristol as well, and those are the important conversations as well, aren't they? Just in someone's house where they're saying, oh, we got this and it didn't really work that well. If I was going to do it again, I'd get this version. And
you don't read those sorts of things in the case studies because people don't want to put in writing that a contractor X was awful and they would never work with them again, but they're really happy to have those conversations,
Yeah, and I do think that's really important, especially for retrofit, because making changes to your house is such an emotional thing. And it's so nice to hear that your neighbour did it and not just the contractor told you this is the right product.
The new normals. The new normal.
Okay, I think I've got one last question. Let me just have another look. Oh, yes. So how can you maintain your unique selling point of being local and independent, but still manage to sort of work with others in a really coordinated and joined up way?
That's a very good question. And one I think we've certainly been grappling with thinking about replication. For me, one of the best things about community energy is its particularities and idiosyncrasies, and I wouldn't say weirdness, but it's all very local, isn't it? It's groups in Shropshire, groups in Devon, in Norfolk, the Northeast, in Scotland, in Ireland, and they really reflect their individual communities and the personalities of the people involved. I find the sector really open, really friendly, really, really inspiring in lots of different ways. And I just think we're developing these things like People Powered Retrofit or carbon, and a lot of people sometimes say, oh, come to place X and do carbon co-op. And I'm really concerned about that sort of thing, because carbon co-op is a Greater Manchester thing, and we've developed it here, and it's all about this place. And I don't know if it would work in Birmingham or, you know, Bristol or wherever. And I'm also concerned about existing organisations and activities in those areas. So our thinking, and this has always been our thinking, is not wanting to grow Carbon Co-op into some national brand or what have you, but to replicate kind of services such as People Powered Retrofit or the assessment, and say, okay, Cumbria Action for Sustainability now operate, you know, an assessment service, home retrofit planner, and there's a bit of a brand there, because then brand recognition helps people gain confidence in something and recognition, and you know, everyone helps. But it's not Carbon Co-op Cumbria, it's Cumbria Action for Sustainability. And I don't think it's necessarily a very healthy thing to think, oh, you know, you could grow an organisation nationally anyway. And the scale of the challenge is such that, you know, there's far more than enough work to do here in Greater Manchester. So I think there are models and tools, and you mentioned things like Lumio and Trello and things that can support the national delivery of certain tools and services by local groups, and they can help and support the other activity of those groups. That's my feeling anyway. I do think but one thing. So that's the kind of argument for autonomy. The other thing is, I think there is a huge amount of knowledge and expertise that is being churned out there that is not necessarily being harnessed. That the knowledge is going out there. We've been involved in a number of European projects where you work for 4 years steadily on something, and then dissemination takes place via a conference, and then it's put away in a drawer and it's forgotten about. You know, in retrofit, we see there's things like retrofit logbooks, there's one-stop shops, there's knowledge and learning out there, but where are the replicable models, and where's the ability for people to pick up something that's been developed by someone else and be able to use that? And for me, and this is our take, is there's a huge amount of room there for software and platforms published under open source licenses that can be used by others. And the other thing is around open standards, because if we do a retrofit assessment here, I'd want someone to be able to use that information to deliver a retrofit in Leeds, not done by us, but done by someone else. And I'd want someone in Greater Manchester who'd got an assessment from another provider to be able to come to us, and we'd be able to use that information. And at the moment, there's too many walled gardens. There's too many people that I've got my standard here, I've got my tool here, but you can't see the information, you can't take the data out. It's a black box behind it. And we really advocate for more open standards and more open innovation in this area, and for funders to understand and support that and get behind that. Everyone from government to trusts like Power to Change, you know. So it's a bit about like local autonomy and doing stuff, and a bit about more sharing and more ability for people to pick up models and use them.
Yeah, I thought the diagram you shared earlier was really interesting, showing sort of sliding scale from just sort of putting it out there and letting someone do what they want with it, or like packaging it into something. Yeah, this one, and into a social license. And it's sort of, where along that scale do you want to sit? And also, you know, if you wait too long to tell people about your innovative project, it might not be innovative anymore, and everyone's done 10 different versions and made the same mistakes that you made 10 times over. So it is a difficult balance, isn't it?
I think all those things under affiliation, they're all really interesting, and they're all slightly different as well. You know, from federating or associating to joint ventures and social licensing, these are all existing models that exist in different sectors that we can be experimenting with and using. And they're ways to achieve what you said, basically, to use that knowledge, but grow it strategically, and not just put it out into the ether and hope that someone's going to take that knowledge and run with it. You know, I think that was our kind of ambition to begin with, is that we'll publish this in an open source license and people will just use it. It's actually, there's more to it than that. And these sorts of things in the middle kind of help achieve those.
Yeah. And I think there also needs to be more openness about things that don't work. Everyone wants to tell everyone what went well, but you learn so much from hearing what didn't work for people, and yeah, not feeling like that's a failure, just sharing that information.
And
Definitely something we try and encourage in Next Gen, but it's not easy.
Creating the forums for that to take place, because it needs to be one of trust, really, and the ability for honest communication, which is, it's not always easy, but you learn so much. And that was the same in the Fueling Manchester. You learn so much from things that went wrong, because you then understand what goes right or what can go wrong,
Yeah, and having understanding funders that understand that those things go wrong sometimes is really essential.
Risk. How open are they to risk? But there's an interesting thing there about funders, is that they always want to see new things. So, and we're one of the messages we're saying is, like, if something works somewhere, why not work somewhere else? So funders are very reticent to fund existing models working elsewhere, because they want to see that we back this. It's a challenge thing, because I can understand why there's that dynamic. And also, if something does work somewhere, there should be a business model. If there's a business model, there should be a route to capitalizing that to work elsewhere. But there are these early stage replications of existing models where it would be interesting to see funders get more involved in them.
Yeah, definitely. Right, I can see loads and loads of questions coming through on the chat. So I'm going to hand over to Megan. Are you ready with some questions, Megan?
It's more like ongoing conversations.
Okay.
I've been following it. I think it would be really useful if we extracted the chat from this webinar and maybe like do a bit of a write-up, because it seems really interesting. There's lots of comments being made about kind of how the social replication work for more non-profit work, and how to kind of scale your model, as well as making it appropriate for local areas as well. I'm not going to reread like all the conversations, so it'd be best to extract it. But there is a couple questions that came in before today's webinar, and some questions which have matched up a bit to those. So I'll cover those if that's okay. So there was a question from Nigel Lloyd, which is asking, how do we access resources, funding to enable homeowners to install insulation, ventilation, and low carbon heating? And also another question from Kate Brown in that vein is, what is the approach for those who are not able to pay, and how are those retrofits funded?
Cool. Yeah, so there's two different questions there. So how can we support people? So what I would say is that there is a huge number of people that are willing, able, and up for paying for this work themselves. So one of the fundamental things is to give them the opportunities to do that. So overcoming some of these barriers, creating services that enable them to do that. One of the things that really frustrates us is this payback question. It's like, when will my retrofit pay back? And what we are offering is a quality service that improves people's homes. It improves the livability of the homes, improves the fabric of the home, the long-term value of the home, and the everything. And it's a quality service. And people don't say, when will my kitchen pay back? When will my new kitchen pay back? Or when will my loft conversion pay back? And yet in the energy efficiency world, people are like, when will my insulation pay back? And this is kind of a myth that's been perpetuated by policymakers, that this sort of stuff will pay back. And what that creates is a low value kind of anticipation from clients. Like, this is cheap stuff that will cost me nothing and there's no risk to it, and that's actually quite a small segment of the whole possible market here. And I think it's a mid-market kind of proposition there. And we're looking for value, we're looking for quality and that sort of thing. So we're looking for people that have money to invest in their homes and helping them do that. And if you think about it in those terms, rather than trying to sell something they don't necessarily want, but actually helping to liberate an already existing desire that people have, it suddenly becomes a bit easier. It's like water flowing downhill and you're just trying to undam something. Now, the other question, which is a really valid question, is about the not able to pay. And I think it's important to think about those people. In social housing, there is actually a hell of a lot of work going on. People's houses are inspected, on flats are inspected on a regular basis. There are quality standards in place. There are asset plans in place. Generally, and not, there are definitely specifics where it's not the case, but generally social housing is, with providers, housing associations, is a lot better quality and a lot better performing than the private stock. Yeah, I think a key area is private at rental, where there aren't those obligations, and basically owner occupiers that are pretty skint for all variety of reasons and don't have the capital to invest in their homes. Where people cannot invest and where there is an imperative, the state needs to intervene. Yeah, there's no two ways around it. There's only so much advice that we can give, encouragement we can do with private landlords. We can't, as community energy groups, we cannot compel private landlords to raise the quality of their housing stock. The state needs to intervene. The state needs to intervene in regulatory terms and in funding terms as well. And in both those terms, it's failing. The MEES, minimum energy efficiency standards legislation, is a start point, but it's not being implemented properly, and the councils aren't resourced to enforce it. Eco is just completely, sorry, I was going to swear then, but it's completely buggered as a system for funding. So this is energy company obligation. This is money that energy companies are obligated to invest in homes. And ever since David Cameron got rid of the green crap, that whole kind of system has been a losing game. And it's unfortunately, it is part of a system where the poorest in our communities are given the worst quality services, and it's part of an unfortunate focus on benefits holistically from government to screw them down. And so the best thing we can do a few things. We can innovate and demonstrate what is possible. Yeah. In both private and rental and owner occupier. We can, where possible, grab bits of money to try and demonstrate best practice. And we're doing a project in Manchester, working with the local council there and the health authorities as well to demonstrate that. And we can also campaign politically and say, okay, as a sector, we need more enforcement here because it's not going to happen otherwise. So yeah, where we can't act, the state needs to act, and the state won't act unless it's compelled to, so yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people are talking about MEES in the chat box. It's interesting that CSC has recently done some research into MEES and how it's enforced. And yeah, it seems we had a webinar about that last week. It seems that it's just really impossible to enforce. There's so many complications to do with it. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's interesting, we talked in Cambridge around ways of mapping and using open data sets and using it as a way of councils enforcing stuff. But the legislation needs to be tightened. But those councils have got other competing resources as well, and enforcing MEES is not top of their list, unfortunately. But it'd be really good to watch that webinar, because I think it's something that can be built on. And often we need to think about wedges. That there's a wedge there. Let's expand it. So there is something that's good. Needs to be better.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. We've, again, lots of really great conversations happening in the chat. We will extract that and make sure that's not lost. There was a question that came through prior to the event, and you spoke about kind of platforms and tools. So there might be a bit of duplication here, but a question from Alex Hartley asking, how could the community energy sector collaborate for a shared online platform to not only support social replication, but co-monitor overall sector impact? What do you think would need to happen? And maybe it doesn't need to just be for retrofit, but could be for other strands of work, such as renewables and fuel poverty.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, Alex. And I think, so two parts to it, but one is sort of harking back to my previous point, is that whatever mechanisms we use need to be as open as possible, both in their methodology and in their licensing, so that it can be utilized by as many people as possible. There are too many black box kind of bits of tools that kind of work only for a certain, you don't understand how they work or they don't work. And it's really important with these methodologies that they're open, and community, the people using them can then influence them as well. In terms of, like you say, in terms of monitoring our impact, Community Energy England do have some social value impact kind of tools. What we'd say is they're really good, but they're really broad, you know, and they're really broad things necessarily because it's such a broad sector around like how has participating in a community energy organisation helped your awareness of these issues or given you the ability to act on these issues. So I think that there's totally the opportunity for people to collaborate around this, but I think we, you know, discussed it with Rachel as well, like these tools for collaborative working and collaboration, they need to be there, and it also, yeah, totally needs to be open source kind of tools as well. So it's not trying to benefit a particular kind of group.
Yeah. Do you think that there's potential scope in the sector to kind of create a new platform entirely, create a new tool for this? Or
well, it's all about the need, isn't it? It's kind of like we want to demonstrate impact, but to what end? You know, is it important for funders? Probably it is. Is it important for the government? You know, maybe maybe they were more interested in this sector a while ago. Is it important for our operations as well? It's kind of that thing I was talking about with Rachel, where you want to understand the different people involved and what their interests are. So for us, we've got a really key kind of need, which is around, you know, the efficacy of the service. You know, people want to save carbon. Are they saving carbon? And there's a huge imperative for us to be able to present those results to them. So I think if the need is great enough, then it will happen. If the need's not great enough, it won't happen just yet, and that's fine. And we can be patient, but yeah. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Just a question that just came in now from John Morris. Have you addressed the problem of smaller builders needed workers with very wide range of certification for retrofit work, but only using small element of those skills, making them want to do just elements of work rather than the whole house approach?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two, every question's got two bits. So there's something about accreditations in there, and there's something about skills. Yeah. Our first take on accreditations is, especially in this sector, that they're not really appropriate. Now, one example is retrofit coordinator accreditation. So this coordinator is a new kind of job role that's come out of PAS 2035, this process standard. And it's a role where they coordinate different parts of the retrofit, help the householder make decisions. They're on site and they're spotting bits of quality stuff that's going wrong and advising the client about that. Now, there's a retrofit coordinator standard that's out there, but the standard is necessarily designed more for housing providers and eco providers because it's the kind of bulk of the market there. And it works less well for people who are working in individual owner-occupier homes. Now, PAS 2035, the board putting it together, they understand that, and we're advising them on how they can change that. But that accreditation, I can well understand why a small consultant or a contractor wouldn't go and pay out that money. It's time and money. To have an accreditation doesn't really work wholly for what the work they're doing. And it's an approach we take is, because we're not delivering eco and we're not delivering certain standards, certain incentive-driven work, we can be more flexible and we can do more on-site training with contractors and consultants that have the lived experience of this work and don't necessarily have the qualification. The other thing is about the local networks, local contractor networks. And as is it John, sorry, who asked the question? As John said, basically, you don't necessarily train up this one contractor to do everything. Yeah. And that's why I think the community energy intermediary is so good at creating networks of contractors, that you can bring in different contractors for different specialist skills. And you can work with a plasterer to develop their skills on certain types of external wall insulation and say, right, when we've got this, we can bring you in and we can help you build your business, basically, because we can give you demand for that. You don't necessarily need all past 2035 or past 2030, because a lot of these contractors, they're really busy. So if you're saying you need to go to a classroom for a week or whatever, you know, they're losing money, they're risking, and will they use this as well? So John's point is absolutely correct, and we can play a really good intermediary role in kind of facilitating specific bits of training, building networks, and not necessarily going down the accreditation route, which you might go down at a later point, but it's not necessarily the starting point.
The accreditation is needed to deliver works under the Green Homes grant, isn't it?
Which is kind of one of our points about Green Homes grant, is that the reason the government of, like, you know, this grant scheme, there aren't any contractors. Well, yeah, because on the big scale, you have companies, Carillion, I gave an example, they're no good going, but there are other companies in that kind of area. It didn't work for them, retrofit. So they could afford these accreditations, but they don't want to do it. They're not doing it. Then at the bottom, you have these, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of contractors that could quite easily do this work, but they haven't sat down for this accreditation and that. And also there's a great deal of distrust in the sector from contractors, things like eco. A lot of people have been really badly screwed over. The subcontractors, they've worked at piecemeal rates. When the eco funding has gone, they've just been abandoned. There's been no. Why do they want to get involved in this stuff? Government wants to spend 2 billion by March. Well, I don't want to be part of that. I'm busy already, you know. So you're left with an intermediary level of contractors that are big enough to invest in the accreditation, but small enough to be able to do the work, and that's why there aren't any of them, you know. So the approach to accreditation needs to be improved, really, and the ability to say, I've done a course in a classroom for 5 days equals quality, and we've demonstrated that's not true. There's so many eco schemes that have delivered very poor quality. So our approach to accreditation really needs to change. It needs to be more on site, it needs to be more practical. And if we can use people like intermediaries, community energy groups, we can mediate a lot of that quality directly, you know.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Sorry,
a few more questions.
That was a bit of a rant.
I love Amar has asked, can Carbon Co-op and similar groups start to move into installing retrofit, I presume, measures themselves?
Well, it's interesting. Do we want to, you know? So within a procurement of a retrofit, you have a householder and you have a contractor, yeah. And we did in the past get involved in the middle, yeah. And that created a great deal of risk for us as an organisation, because if we're giving advice, you know, we give advice, we're insured to give that advice, you know, the client acts on that advice, and that's their right and their freedom to do that, and we can advise them. But if we're in the middle, and if something goes wrong, yeah, so if you know, for all the right reasons, you know, mistakes are made, you know, and like stuff, cost overruns, which is very common in contracting, cost overruns, time overruns, you know, suddenly it's the community energy organisation that their necks are on the line. And contracting is a high risk, it's a high risk business. A lot of businesses go out of business. There's a great turnover there as well. And it's also there's a particular skill to it, yeah, to be able to find a client, deliver what they need, work the supply chains, have the cash flow in place, you know, make the margins that you need to make. Yeah, that's a very skilled job. So our community energy groups the best at doing that. So there's the risk elements and there's the skill elements. There is also, I would say, there are some areas where we can be developing supply chains and people that we regularly work with, and the scale of the job and the scale of the works here. So we're trying to procure £500,000 worth of work at the moment. You know, that's a lot. You know, and we're spreading the risk. We're spreading the spreading the benefit as well by working with contractor networks. I think there is definitely a role around design, and we're looking in particular, and there's a webinar coming up in a few weeks around heat pumps, and whether there's work there where community energy groups can be doing the design aspects, and then we have installers or fitters doing the work. So yeah, I mean, there are other things like bulk purchasing and supply chains. We're sat here, we can see this £500,000 worth of work. Maybe Carbon Co-op want to get involved in buying specific materials, solar panels or insulation. So there are ways we can get involved, but actually doing the installation work, being contractors, I don't think it's right for the sector. There are other people who disagree, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question from Chris Crickle-Fallon asking, do you see a potential role for regional / local energy agencies, usually not-for-profit, charity-based, and providing fairly passive advice to householders to become more proactive and adopt the Carbon Co-op model?
Well, so energy agencies, they were a lot more common maybe 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, going back. And as Chris says, they were charitable, and often they had a local authority linked to them. Seven and Y, still going now, and one of the most active in the UK. And there's a few people who are familiar in the community energy sector used to work in those. Now we're working. One of our inspirations for this is Tipperary Energy Agency in Ireland, and we went over there the summer before last, so 2019, and they have a fantastic service-based model, very focused on the client. There's a funding regime in Ireland around whole house, more of a pilot, but basically they developed a service all around that, and they'd done that really well. So not only were they doing retrofits for owner occupiers, they're also doing like community centres and rugby club, solar installations. They were getting involved in energy supply and energy generation as well. And I think there's a fantastic opportunity for energy agencies there. But I also don't think it should stop people like ourselves doing the same thing and getting involved in multiple aspects of the energy system and collaborating with people like local authorities who are natural kind of bedfellows here in terms of their social and environmental kind of ambitions. So yeah, totally, really, really good thing for energy agencies to move into, but also we can move the other way as well, you know.
Great. Another question from Chris is, it would be really useful if Jonathan could spell out the similarities and differences between the Carbon Co-op model and how Retrofit Works operates.
So Retrofit Works, so we're a householder cooperative. Retrofit Works for a supply chain cooperative. So in terms of the service, like they offer similar elements of the service, and they also work with other community intermediaries to deliver that. I think the difference is Retrofit Works are involved in contracting, in that chain of contracting. And so there are things people need to be aware of is like, if we are advising the householder on their procurement, but we're only offering them one potential contractor, is there a conflict of interest there? You know, should there not be like a diversity of different contractors? And if like Retrofit Works is one of them, then all the better. There is also, I think, a thing around like value and where value is realized by community energy organizations. We've developed a service whereby community energy organizations can trade and can take the value which the householder places on procurement and on the delivery of this, and we're able to basically extract that by offering advice through the design and assessment and procurement. With Retrofit Works, where does the value come? Is it within that supply chain cooperative, or can it be realised by the community energy organisation? I think that's a question, you know, rather than me stating one thing or the other. Personally, I think we need to, as a sector, develop our expertise within our own organisations. We want architects, engineers, coordinators who are either staff members or are associated with us as organisations, and that puts the citizen-led organisation in control rather than bringing in third parties that take that expertise and the value with them. Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you so much. We've not had any other questions come in, so I might just hand back to Rachel to close off. But if anybody else has any other questions, then please do email them through, and we can respond to those. But thank you so much.
Cool.
Great, thank you, Megan. Yeah, if we could just move on to the last slide.
Yeah, I did go on there.
Thank you. So yeah, if you want any follow-up information, obviously Jonathan shared his contact details. You can also email us at next-generation@csc.org.uk, and I'll be happy to sort of pass those on to Jonathan or make an introduction or answer any questions you might have about us and CSC. The next Innovation Lab will be shared with you via email. I'm still looking for a speaker for November and also December. So if you're interested, please get in touch. I would love to hear from any of you who would like to host an Innovation Lab in the future. And if you want to just keep up to date with everything that's going on at CSE, that's where you can join up for our newsletter, and I've popped that in the chat as well. And that's where you'll hear about all the future Innovation Lab webinars. Yeah, so email me or email Next Generation. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was a fantastic webinar. So much to think about, and definitely will be downloading the chat because there was so much going on in there. I don't know if you saw it. It was very hard to capture. Yeah, yes, definitely a really great chat to download. So many great ideas flying around. And as always, the recordings are available on the Next Generation website on the Learning tab. So once we've got all this downloaded, it will be there to watch back. And I'm sure if anybody would like your slides, you'd be happy to share them, Jonathan.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
Great. Okay, I think we'll call it to a close there then. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and thank you, Matt, as well, for answering questions in the chat box, and Megan for hosting that Q&A. And yeah, hope to see you all again at the next Innovation Lab.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.